Okay, so are we okay to go, Bakral?
Right. We can start. Thanks, Rob. Please.
Okay, okay. Well, welcome everybody to this series of webinars, and welcome to John Nicholson, who will be presenting today on the theme of strategy, and the title being Blue Ocean Thinking and Disruption. So all I'll say on this is that sustainability attracts a lot of innovators and a lot of entrepreneurs, and there's lots of opportunities. So it's going to be really interesting to look at the ways of thinking and how we strategize some of these developments in sustainability. Next slide, please. So if you haven't already met me, I came into academia about sort of 16 years ago, but predominantly my life has been in mineral extraction and civil engineering. I'm originally a civil engineer that turned into funding and finance, and I've been involved in some big sustainable development projects such as the Eden project and various construction material projects where we've produced bridges and demolition of Kai Tak Airport and various projects around the world with a sustainability theme, dealing with triple SIs and restoration plans and all sorts of things. So my life is very much has been in the waste management industry as well, looking at big recycling projects and innovations. And I still sort of get involved in projects. So there's a little bit of a profile on me, but sustainability is where I sort of landed in a career. Edupro to glance. So Edupro, I was introduced as Edupro to be an advisor to them, and it's been a really interesting journey. And I've got involved in their development, which has allowed students to access education around the world through their various partnerships. But their sort of USP, Edupro, is very much on sustainability, ethics, and creating meaningful qualifications that we can use as practitioners. Next slide, please. So in terms of having a vision and a mission, what is their intent? Edupro, well, it's very industry-led. It's the sort of reverse engineer into getting to understand what does industry require as practitioners, and that forms part of the basis of how they develop their learning programs and who they partner with. The focus is very much on sustainability, and we know about the United Nations Sustainable Goals and sustainable competencies, but it's far more reaching than that. We get involved in sustainable funding and finance and the different themes of sustainability in the competencies that you require. So it's quite a unique offering in the partnerships that they develop to ensure that the learners have a meaningful outcome to allow them to be sustainable practitioners. Next slide, please. So where has Edupro gone in recent years? Well, it's got a very broad coverage across African nations, Southeast Asia, the Asia Pacific Rim, and Europe, over 22 countries, offering a selection of over 40 qualifications at different levels, which we'll go through later. And it's facilitated graduations at undergraduate and postgraduate levels. Next slide, please. So there are different pathways, and they all vary depending on where you're coming into the educational system. But as learners, you can get involved in level 3 through certificates and diplomas, and level 4, and we progress into level 6 and level 7 at postgraduate level. Their partnerships are geographically located in the UK. So we've got the south of England, and we've got the north of England and in the middle. So we've been very selective at Solent, Southampton and Huddersfield, Open University and the University of West England. And these different partnerships allow various exemptions and qualifications to go onto these routes. Now, to ensure that we create this network of sustainable practitioners and to provide you the opportunity for CPD, continuous professional and personal development, we launched the Green Talent Award Programme. And this is this first opportunity to see how we can create a network of sustainable thinkers. And with that, we've brought on board various sponsors, on our main sponsor being Leeds University. And we've got various ambassadors involved in this. And so this is a real network of movers and shakers in sustainability. But the Green Talent Award Programme allows us to look at different cases. And these cases are going to be issued over a timeline at 3 different stages. And these cases that we provide you will look at things like the circular economy, it'll look about climate change, it will look about waste minimization and recycling, looking at green finance, various case studies for you as teams to work on at the various rounds. And looking at these, we go through 3 rounds, and then we have a final presentation, and the results will be announced at the end of November. At the moment, we have over 108 teams, I believe, spanning nearly over 14 or 18 countries. Fackrell has the stats on that,
Yeah,
but it's
16 countries.
16 countries. And how many teams have we got, Fackrell?
Now 128.
How many?
128. 128.
That number keeps going up and up. It was 108
Yeah.
last week. So,
Right.
and this is a great opportunity to not only to take part in a competition, but we're hoping that there's going to be some outcomes from this. And this is something that John will hopefully allude to, is that a lot of the innovations come from individuals and small companies and micro companies. It's not just the corporates that get involved. So this is something that we're looking forward to in this presentation from John. We'd like to know where you are coming from today on this webinar. So if you could just write in the Zoom chat which countries you're from, that would be useful. We get an understanding and a flavour where to pitch to. So what have we got? We've got Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, Pakistan, China, Sri Lanka, Morocco, Somalia, Ghana, Philippines. Welcome, Philippines. Nigeria. Wonderful. Kenya. So Africa, we covered Africa, the Southeast Asia. Wonderful. Okay. Next slide, please. So I'm going to hand you over to John, and he'll give a little bit of background on himself. And as I say, this is, I think this is our fourth webinar, and we're really interested to see what the developments are in strategic thinking and modelling in regard to sustainability. Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Rob. Pleasure to be here. Shall we first deal with the technical issues of getting my slides launched? We have not really used Zoom since COVID, so I'm a little bit rusty with it. So just let me figure out how to share it. Fakro, can you stop sharing yours?
Yeah, myself.
Yeah,
right.
I think I can only launch mine when you stop sharing yours. So
right.
No, it's not letting me do it now. There we go. Right. Let's try this if I've done it right. Right. Can someone tell me whether they can see that, please?
Yeah, you did it.
You did it. Hey, how's that? Great start. No
Yeah,
technical problems. That's off to a good start. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'm flattered to see so many come along to listen today. My name is Professor John Nicholson. Could we mute microphones, please? Thank you. Thank you for all coming today. My name is Professor John Nicholson. I'm a professor of strategy at Huddersfield Business School, one of the partners with Edupro. We're like Edupro, our values are very much about inclusivity. And we've just come out of the graduation ceremonies where our Vice Chancellor has been trumpeting that we are now #1 in the world for inclusivity, which we're very proud of. Now, my presentation is on a strategic theme, and so it will have a lighty in terms of environment. And I think what I'd like to try and stimulate in this is an interest in how you can use business modeling, business models to disrupt non-inclusive and non-environmentally sound practices and business procedures. Now, I have a background in teaching. I come from an agricultural background. I spent 10 years of my life. I was just saying to Rob at the start, I was at Brackenhurst College, which is part of Nottingham Trent, now part of Nottingham Trent University. So I did my first 10 years in agricultural sales. Did my first degree when I was 27 at Hull, and I still live in Hull. My master's at Leeds, and my PhD back at Hull. I've subsequently worked at Hull for 16 years. Then how I got to know one of the directors of this organization, Mohammed Ahmed, who's head of IB at Leeds now, very close personal friend. We shared an office together for 2 years at Nottingham Trent. And I became a professor in 2017 at Huddersfield. So my journey's had 2 careers. So again, for some of you, who actually have ambitions towards academic careers, it doesn't matter that you're in your 30s. I finished my PhD when I was 42. So I hope there's sort of a bit of inspiration to what you can achieve through study. So what I intend to do today is just pull together in a sort of introductory way several concepts. And I'll be honest with you, I covered this in about 10 hours of lectures for both final year master student, final semester, final year master student at Huddersfield, and both final year undergraduates, final semester, and then master students as well. So I'm teaching at that level. As I was informed, some of you are at different levels of academic endeavor. Some of you are practitioners. So I will try to skew what I'm doing as a kind of introduction, but not a basic introduction to some of the ideas that I'm trying to pitch in my lectures as the way forward for strategic management. And I'm actually quite a critique of the way strategic management has been taught and is still taught as a very kind of structured, linear, rational process, which I think, we can all reflect on the level of uncertainty in the environment at the moment, which I'll come to. So what I want to go through is the questions for this section, if I launch the presentation properly, is what are business models? So again, at the end of the session, I'd hope you'd have at least a cursory understanding and where to look for further information. What are platform business models, which is very important as we move into an increasingly digital age. What are disruptive business models? Because not all business models are necessarily disruptive. What are non-disruptive business models? So there are blue oceans, which we get into this argument of market creation rather than disruption of existing structures and industries. And I will touch on, as I say, it's a lighty, but I will touch on how you can develop these ideas into business model innovation for sustainability. Is that okay, Rob, if I crack on then?
Perfect.
Oh, hang on. I'm right at the back of sorry. Somehow I'm right at the end of my presentation. I do apologize. I was before I came on, and I've started at the end. I do apologize. So it's the same questions I was going to start with. So this is what I wanted to throw into the mix. Who can predict next week? And I've spent the last 14 weeks since the middle of January saying to my students, I've never seen more turbulence in my 57 years than I've seen in the last 6 months. So what we thought about the world in one lecture a week later has changed. And I guess you're all feeling the same kind of, the level of conflict is probably never been greater since 1945. So I'm teaching students now to sort of deal with the unpredictability of next week. And I think business models do that quite effectively rather than rely on this very structured annual planning cycle. So this is the case I want to make to you. Those of you who've done strategic management may have done this classic SWOT, PEST, 5 forces model. So I'll pick up some of my critiques from the assumed understanding of some of those models. So we start with this idea of VUCA. If it's a term you haven't heard, it's something I think you should learn. And I say to my students now, don't SWOT. We need to understand now how to think and react almost simultaneously. The volatility, the uncertainty, what we think is the case next week, the markets have collapsed because of a tweet at midnight from the American president. It's complex, and business models are necessarily complex. They're not simplifications of markets and industries and products. And ambiguity, we don't really understand some of what's going on. So in what I'm going to pitch to you now is this underlying principle of dealing with VUCA conditions, okay? So I'm going to iterate between, as I say, I do this in about 10 hours of lectures at Huddersfield. So I'm going to dip in and out of business models, blue oceans, disruption, and I'm going to end with one slide on dynamic capability, which I think ties some of the human and AI things together. So the first thing is challenging conventional wisdom. And I always say to my students, don't, be cowed by the institutional factor. And I usually point to myself and say, the old guy in the room who you might perceive knows better than you. That's rubbish. You, as generally when I'm teaching younger people, need to challenge, I'm going to say it frankly, the people have made a mess of this world. And it's for your generation, certainly the generation, forgive me, I don't know the age groups in the room at the moment, but generally I'm teaching to people in their 20s, for them to be willing and able to challenge conventional wisdom, looking beyond the known, which is looking into the spaces out there and thinking what could be there. So again, a SWOT mentality is about knowing what has already happened. And we might get into AI on this thing as well, and algorithms. Breaking with the past, looking for futures that have not yet existed. Working beyond the boundaries of a firm. So value co-creation and increasing the ecosystem metaphor is about working between companies, not within a single company, if that makes sense. Experimenting and accepting failure, getting away from this shame, which is a very British thing. Americans are better at this than us, actually, but the idea that failure is part of doing your job right. If you're not failing a few times, you ain't taking enough risks. And then seeing business models are just not about disruption, but also about revenue generation, which is creating a balanced portfolio of the exploratory business models and the exploitative working together, a bit like the BCG logic, but in terms of business models. So what is a business model? And I'm going to get to the criticisms of this a bit later on. But very simply, in its simplest possible terms, everything it takes to make something, everything it takes to sell that thing, and how the customer pays. And I'm going to go into a tool called the business model canvas, then critique it, then show some ways of using it. So let's just go a bit further. The structure I like to deal with is, firstly, you need a revenue capturing mechanism. Traditionally, this has been money for product, money for services. Business model innovation often takes it beyond that to such things as hidden profit models, such as data collection and exploitation. It needs still a value creating mechanism. That's exactly what we did with the Ansoff matrix, which I will touch on. When I first did my chartered institute of marketing, I spent 10 years in sales, thinking about selling things into markets, and became a sales manager. And that's the logic. Products, markets, simple. It's not that simple anymore. Value chains, the delivery, the distribution, and how we get things from raw material to manufacture and out to a customer. The value network is increasingly what we talk about now. Ecosystem crosses boundaries. It's more complex than products and markets. And the competitive strategy, which, to be fair, is where a lot of people criticize business model. But again, I'm going to address that. So we'll try and pick up those points as we go through. So going back to what you may know, which is the classic Ansoff matrix, one of the first things I was taught in a course of marketing, which has product innovation. You take a new product and you take it into an existing market, what I always call box one of Ansoff, top left-hand corner. Then you can extend that to another market, potentially international market. And then you also have process innovation. Well, business model goes beyond any one of those. So the idea is that there's still product innovation. It does not a business model make by taking a single product into a single market. By adding a service innovation to a process does not a business model make. It's looking at the complexity of multiple factors, which we will get to a model that I really like, which is Osterwalder's business model canvas. Key drivers, yeah, digitization, servitization, the Internet of Things, AI, and indeed political, shall we say, upheavals that are going on at the moment is driving this, because people need to protect. I will just make one point here, that this is as relevant to someone who's in a traditional business defending against disruption as it is for the disruptor. There's two aspects of this: disrupted and disruptor. Either way, I think it's worth understanding business models, because if you're not thinking about business models, you're likely to be disrupted by them and therefore need to learn how to defend against them. So this is where I always start with my students, by hammering them about moves in an Ansoff matrix, and I have a particular way of teaching it that talks about arrows. So you have move 1, move 2, which I think extends the logic of markets and products. But the two questions I then put to them: can a market be created? Does a market pre-exist your move into it? And what was it before it existed? We're getting to deep philosophical ideas now of where time comes from. Where is the beginning? And something that fascinates me. We won't get into that today, but think about what was it before it existed. So the Ansoff has words in it called new to you and new to everyone, which is where we lead to the discussion of blue and red. Okay. And what was it before it existed? So there's an innovative process through which markets enter that top left-hand corner. Okay. So I want to touch now onto blue oceans, then come back to the Ansoff with a solution that I think I've come up with. I'll come into that. So the first thing with this idea of blue oceans, and these are two very good books, believe it or not. I just noticed I've got it sitting on the shelf above me. That's the second one of the two, Blue Ocean Shift. And if you haven't had these are fantastic books. They've sold about 15 million copies. Not that popular with academics. It reads as a toolbox of ideas. I love it. Students like being taught it, and I've done several pieces of consultancy, which is very effective. One which I might touch on a bit later. But in those two books, and this is Kim and Morborn, Blue Ocean and Blue Ocean Shift, they stick with this one of 5 really good models. This is the 6 paths, or the 6 pathways framework. The first thing is to break with the logic of the 5 forces, to look across industries, not within a single industry. Recombinant innovation, for instance, can involve no actual newness, but a new combination of it. I mean, an e-cigarette actually doesn't have a lot of breakthrough technology in it. It's actually recombinant innovation across industries. The strategic groups within an industry, yeah? So one of the techniques I teach very early in order to take it to bits is to break up competitive sets within a defined industry. So what I do is I use a fictional case of hotels, and get them doing, high value, low value, cheap airport, city center, conference venues, and then drop Airbnb into it. The stone in the water that upsets this idea of there being a hotel industry. Well, they're not in the hotel industry, Airbnb, but they are an entrant into vacation stays, or stays in a location. Look across the chain of buyers and redefine the buyer group. So essentially looking, for instance, an example I think works across these two would be, and they use it in the book, is Cirque du Soleil, which is a combination of circus and theatre. So what they've done is open up a frontier, which is new, in which people who would neither go to the theatre or the cinema, neither would go to the theatre or the circus, come to Cirque du Soleil. And so they changed the buyer group and also the functional and emotional orientation. They're not wanting to come to circus to see circus animals, being tamed and so on. So they take that out. They like the show to predict what the show is that they're going to get. They like the choreography. So, and it's in a big tent. So it's a different environment to going to a theatre. Complementary products and services. Again, I come back to the e-cigarette situation. What can we do in terms of bringing, different technologies from complementary industries, from the battery technology to the igniter to the actual liquid. And then this one, I think, is probably best illustrated by America at the moment. Did Elon Musk get involved with politics in order to secure the subsidies for environmentally sensitive cars in the USA, which he's seemingly failed to have done. But it's getting into these situations where you're not passive, but you're involved in shaping those trends over time. So I'll then spin back to something I think I've come up with myself. The reason I say that is that putting red and blue zones in an ANSOS seems so simple that someone else must have come up with it. So I haven't published it and I haven't claimed it, but for the moment, no one's told me that someone else has done this before me. So I'm still kind of thinking it's mine. But I think that shows you that when you move in an ANSOS, there are blue and there are red spaces. There are those spaces which have no competition, the uncontested space. So you can almost visualize an arrow moving from here to here or here to here. Oh, sorry, we go back. So I think it's useful to break this ANSOS logic, if you're familiar with it, up to red and blue spaces. Red, as the color implies, and I don't mean this in a swearing term, bloody. It implies a hard-fought, warlike environment where bloodshed occurs. The blue is going into the blue ocean where you are the first mover. Critics say first mover advantage is just what it always was. They argue that first mover advantage in terms of blue ocean, gives you sustainable competitive advantage. And I'll come back to that when I look at multi-sided platforms. There's a kind of a logic to it. And it does seem that the first mover to these blue oceans, the likes of your Amazons and your Airbnbs and your Ubers, have sustained that position. That first mover advantage has continued. It's not a second place one that's just come in and taken their position, which was often the case with some of the technological innovators, like the old VHS with beta and video recording, whereas second place entry, which was VHS, disrupted and finished off Betamax, which was the first into the market. That doesn't seem to be quite happening with business model innovation. So far, we've talked about what a business model is very briefly, where you can actually build potentially in an uncontested space, a non-disruptive innovation moves into the blue, whereas a disruptive innovation would be in a contested space, which has a significant detrimental effect on the incumbents. Does that make sense? If it isn't, please jump in and say, could I go over this again? Okay. Now, moving on quite quickly, this is the model I want to introduce you to or to highlight if you're familiar with it. Alex Osterwald has made a career out of this model. If you go on to strategizer.com, there's a consultancy built around it. Fantastic book, which I just don't have on my shelf. I think it's in my office. Osterwald and Pigonard's book on business model innovation is a classic. And the way it changes the strategy lens, it moves from a kind of a planning lens to a design lens. And, I've had one or two students come in from a design background who've absolutely loved it. Because you use it in a very messy way. Firstly, it's not a fixed model, so you can add bits on, you can modify it, you can make it work for you. I like to use the term a model for rather than a model of. Models for comes from the systems logic. It's a model for is something you use now to plan a future. A model of is a kind of a retrospective logic of what's already happened. So it's a model for. So what you would do is try to look at a picture of a company. We use case studies. You can use your own one. And it has two main halves. The red on this side, the operational value capture. On this side, the value creation. So this is classically what would have been in an ANSOS. This is where we get into financial concerns and parts of the value chain. Critics say it's just a value chain by a different name. I don't think so. I think it's something different, and I've worked with it. At the end, you have a cost structure and a revenue stream. Yeah. So traditionally, it was fairly simple. You sold things and you got money, and your costs were for manufacturing, labor, and so on. Your key resources would have been, your manufacturing plant, your brand. It's now more complicated. The value proposition remains in the middle as a combination of these two things. So you start by, I tend to start by putting it on a piece of paper. I still love paper. I like Post-it pads. I get exercises done with students or clients, literally trying to break down what they think their business model is. You start with the present. Critics say you don't get beyond that point. I don't agree, and I'll come to that particular criticism. Now, for those of you who obviously I will provide the slides to you. I've broken down some of the examples from that they give in Osterwalder's book, but also my own additions to say, here's some examples of the things that fit into those boxes. I don't propose to go through all those. It's something, again, for further reading. And the sort of things that you might want to search. It's kind of a series of prompts when you're trying to do this for real, okay? On the other side of it, we can do the value capture. Yeah, partnership is increasingly important now because we're working outside the boundaries of the firm. Your key activities and your key resources is classically, your resource-based view stuff is in there. So I think it's very useful because it brings together a lot of what you've traditionally been taught in strategic management. Now, one of my questions I put at the beginning is how we bring sustainability into that. So I will address this now. For those of you who are going for the awards, for instance, I think there's a couple of hints here that might be very promising for you. The first modification I saw was when they simply tag on environmental impact and environmental benefits. So it's not just about money and cost, right? We can also go into there to think about what benefits are generated by this design and what impacts it has. Yeah. And so we can build those in. And I haven't used it, but one of my students who's currently doing a PhD in robotics and working with a company said, she came back into one of my lectures this year and said, have you used the flourishing business model, which is, and again, I don't know this company, I'm not promoting them, but I thought this was excellent variation of it. But what I'm trying to show is that you adapt this to your own needs. And the thing I like about this is it splits down kind of layers of economy, society, and environment on this side. So when it talks about biophysical stocks, it's looking at the actual cost to the environment of doing this. And also in the center, I like this idea of value co-destruction because they're layered. We're looking at the cost to the environment, cost to society, and cost to the economy. So we're not just looking at, money magnets, but also value co-destruction with value co-creation. Interesting example I read yesterday is that a company, I think it's based at Leeds University, is looking at rebuilding Ukraine using recycled concrete from all the buildings that have been blown up. And I hadn't realized that a significant portion of the CO2 emissions are from concrete manufacture. I didn't know that till yesterday. And one of the ideas is this business model is not just about reconstruction, but using waste product to reduce environmental impact. And that was new to me. And I thought that's a very interesting business model about recycling concrete, which I might look into and see if I can contact the company, because I think it's really illustrative, this idea. So you have everything there that was in Osterwalder's version. You actually have also, actors and needs, which moves into, again, the idea of missions involved in this, which arguably is missing from the original business model canvas. Again, if I can see it, there's another book. No, I can't put my hand on it. If I see it, I'll bring it up, which goes into this point a bit better. So the flourishing business model is a variation on Osterwalder. I do recommend you looking at them both. And this might be a way of working this in when you're doing a presentation, your ideas for environmental awards, to look at how you build a business model that considers environmental costs, impacts, and co-destruction. I think those are very, very good little hints for you to engage with this. As I say, I do nearly 2 hours on these last 3 slides. So I'm rushing through this quite quickly as an introductory discussion. Have I got that in twice for some reason? I have. I don't know, right? Sorry about that. Now, if we take the Ansoff logic, which is a market with a product moving into a market, new market, existing market, and so on, This is where it becomes very different, because it's not just about an advantage of a product in a market. It's about designing different, what they call epicenters. It's not just about the direction and method, but it's also about such as offer driven, customer driven, and finance driven, and resource driven. I will illustrate a resource driven one, which is the Disney Plus, in a second if we have time. So we need to move away from this logic of advantage being gained from markets, products taken into markets, but also the design of different epicenters in a business model. And invariably, a lot of them are multi-epicenter driven. So if you look at I'll come to Netflix and so on at the moment, they have a subscription model. Yeah. They have a resource, well, Disney Plus, when I'll come to it, is driven by a legacy of titles going back, decades, which caused some significant problems for Netflix, which I'll come to in a second. But in there, they also have not just a subscription model, also massive amounts of data. That data is sold for an additional revenue stream. So it's multi-epicenters. They have multiple ways of capturing of money rather than just being offer driven. Yeah. So they are offer driven. They're offering now original content on these platforms. And this is the distinction between Disney Plus and Netflix, which I'll come to. Now, what is disruptive? So firstly, not all business models are disruptive. Some of them are highly lucrative, but are not disruptive because they create a market. They are blue ocean business models. Some disrupt significantly in the red existing ways of doing it. Not all business models have technological innovation at the heart of it. Value innovation, and this is why, and I will say, younger entrepreneurs can often see these recombinations that people have been wedded to a way of doing business cannot see. And a Zuckerberg has come along and seen this opportunity with Facebook that, very experienced business people just could not see. And it's recombining things that probably already exist. And I'll come to aggregator business models in a second. Some are based on innovative technologies. Yes. Some of them are based, if you look at an EasyJet, when it first came along, and I'll touch on the Southwestern model, there's precious little technological innovation in there. It's a value innovation. It's landing in different places. It's about what you charge. It's about variable pricing. The really piece of innovation that's in there is the algorithm, the pricing algorithm that varies the price relative to demand. We'll come to that. Creative imitation, again, I want to touch on as well, which is taking a business model of a model, we call it a template, yeah, that has a series of things which are the value capturing and value creating mechanisms, which you can take and drop into another sector. And I have one of my Nigerian students from 2 years ago absolutely became a massive fan of business models, and he's been writing to me ever since. He's been taking various templates and fitting it all over the Nigerian economy, trying to find this best fit for a business he wants to start, and trying to say, right, has this been done here? Has this been done here? So it's almost kind of a jigsaw effect where you're trying to put it in a hole. The shape that you've defined fits in a hole, and you just have to find that hole. And if you do, you're going to make a lot of money. And one of the problems of actually doing assessments in business model innovation, in challenging students to come up with a business model innovation, is, quite frankly, if they genuinely come up with a business model innovation, they shouldn't tell me. They should go and do it. So I'm very loath to challenge them to give me all their best ideas. If you see it, go and do it. So let's give you some examples. Again, this is another commercial organization, but Business Model Navigator goes through about 65 different recognized templates, or what they call models of models. Razor and Blade is an interesting one. I touched on the bottom of that slide. Is when you, I'm talking about the British environment here, but I am assuming, because we've got such an international reach, it's very similar across the world. When you buy a razor, you basically get the handle for free, right? And then you pay a fortune for the blades that go on it. Okay. Now, what they've done is taken that model and go to Nespresso and to coffee machines. Coffee machines, they sell the actual very expensive machine for very little, and you pay an extraordinary amount of money for the refills for coffee. So no frills has been extended to different sectors, and I'm going to go on to the second. And then there's all these other ones, which I don't propose to go into, but you can go and look at examples of them on that site. Layer Player, Robinhood, licensing, solutions, crowdfunding, long tail, that's an Amazon model, mass customization. And you can take a template and think, right, where else could I fit this? And if you're the one who sees that gap that the jigsaw piece goes into, 10 years work and you're retiring. Yeah. So it's a very interesting way of innovative, is creative imitation. Now, I want to come back now to Blue Oceans and touch on the famous Southwestern model, which is essentially better known in Europe as EasyJet and Ryanair. And what they try to do is use a technique which is now being codified in the Blue Ocean toolbox as eliminate, reduce, raise, create, the 4 actions framework. So what they're doing here is to reduce certain factors. So the idea is that I'll come to the principle of overshoot in a second, but to create the speed of the plane at the price of the car. And they create this value curve, and I get my students in the last tutorial doing this for this example using Airbnb to reduce the cost here, so allow you to actually differentiate on price, but also make sure you're as fast as the car. So they make it faster than the other airlines, but cheaper. And the value curve technique is a great technique. It is not positioning by a different name. It's something very different. But in that business model, then it is creatively copied by Ryanair, EasyJet, and many equivalents around Kingfisher in India and so on have copied the same model. So again, you create it, you look around, you see a template saying, can I do this in this country? And given we've got an international reach in here, it's actually studying the business models that exist around the world and thinking, will it work here? And as I say, one of my Nigerian students is determined he's going to find, he hasn't, well, I told him if he did find it, not to tell me what it was. So I can't guarantee he hasn't found it, but he is very actively looking for this kind of innovation in the Nigerian economy. So I seem to be going backwards when I'm going forward. So Ryanair then in the UK was copied by Disposable Fashion, the Zara model. The discount grocers, Lidl, Aldi, came in to challenge the kind of the, again, forgiving me that you all know the UK economy, but the dominant chains, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda in the middle. And then your slightly higher ones like Waitrose moving up to, say, a Harrods at the top. They came in at the bottom and took a very significant share of the market in the UK. I'm sorry, I'm getting frustrated because every time I'm clicking forward, it's going backwards. So I do apologize. So I want to explain this to you and how this works, okay? This is Christensen's theory of disruptive innovation. It's about what they call low-end disruption. 2 principles that you need to look for in an industry to make this work. One is this idea of overshoot. So the airline industry, for instance, kept adding value at the top end. We have pillows, we have blankets, we have, you know, entertainment. We have more and more fancy food. So the cost to the consumer kept going up along this line. Well, that assumes every consumer wants that. If you're on a short haul flight of an hour, do you need food? I mean, I've been on the short haul flights where they're literally pushing the trolley uphill because the plane is still going up and doesn't have enough time to plateau out and drop again before they do the service. So EasyJet come along and say, do people all want to pay for an extra bag? Do they all want to pay? Would they mind paying to go to the toilet? Do they all need to go to the toilet during the flight? Do they all want, you know, the same amount of weight of baggage? Do they need to reserve a seat? Yeah. Do they need to sit to their friends? All of these things then become paid extras. So we reduce it to no frills. Now, what happens is they enter down here. So all the flag carriers, the British Airways and so on are up here, Air France. So they come in here and they're dismissed initially as an irritant that will go away. And they're also taking initially the cheap customers, right? The ones that the big airlines don't want. They're happy to lose these people. And so they don't react. So they've now got a foothold, right? And all of a sudden, the medium quality use customers seem thinking, hang on a minute, why am I paying to book? I don't need to book. I'm happy to book a seat. I'm happy to be given a seat when I get on the plane. So I'm happy to pay less money. So I'll move down. So all of a sudden, they start losing the customers they do want. By this time, they react. So British Airways initially set up a company called Go. They had no clue how the business model of EasyJet worked. It was a flat failure, and they ended up selling it off because they're in this kind of flag carrying mentality. And this is it. The disruptors mentality, the business model mentality, is not easy to replicate for a traditional business. So what you've got now is they're right up here in terms of market share with the fleet that they have, their cost. They were not a low-cost business model at the beginning. They could not compete for prices of planes and fuel with the big players. They were a low-price business model, different thing. Now they get costs very similar to the flag carriers, if not better, because I think Ryanair are now officially the biggest buyer of aircraft in the world. I think that's right. So there's this idea of disruption from a particular theorist called Clay Christensen, whose work I think is very, very good. But then the other thing is technological disruption. And the biggest one, of course, platforms and platformization. Again, I go back to the traditional stuff. 5 forces, the classic industry model. We add on first the idea of complementers, a 6th force, right? So we start to look at the complementers to a business model. The big 4 ecosystems, the FAMGA of this world, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Apple, the 4 big ones, have this principle of having lots of complementers, lots of what we call, peripheral firms in the ecosystem. And they've become massively disruptive through the technology. So they've disrupted multiple. So they're in the red. They have disrupted multiple other traditional, what we might call traditional business models or traditional ways of doing business. So within that, you have a platform leader. And one of the things that's, really sort of challenges the Porterian notion of cost leadership and cost advantage is platform ownership. If you're the blue ocean move or the main disruptor who launches a platform, attracts the complementers and attracts the customers. Now think about it. If you're, let's take Airbnb, you've gone out there and you've secured agreements with all the property owners, right? Complementers. And then the customers have come into the other side of the platform, 2-sided platform. They're coming onto your platform because you've got the complementers. Think about the second mover coming in. Very difficult, isn't it? Because they've either got to get all the complementers onto their platform, which they're not going to do because they don't have the customers, or they've got to get all the customers onto their platform, which they're not going to do because they haven't got the properties. Your first move there, whether you call it blue or red, secures a sustainable advantage. And if you've identified this platformization early, and this is why I think some of these companies are going to be there for a considerable amount of time before who knows what the next main disruptive technology is. But I can't see at the moment how their platformization will be challenged. So we have this idea of 2-sided platforms. On the one side, the complementers, on the other, we have the customers. And then we start to look at different sides. So as an Amazon model, Amazon Prime, for instance, looks at advertising. So advertising is a 3rd element to the model. So the platform leadership or the orchestrator is what we want to try and achieve. We want to be the platform orchestrator. If not, you're a complementer, and then you have a whole, and again, I do literally an hour on different strategies for complementers and platform leadership. But that book, that particular article is very good going through this. So let me just show you one example of a template, an aggregator business model, one of the most common ones, which is platformized. If you look at an Uber, a Just Eat, or an Airbnb, they're doing very little other than moving orders across that platform, taking a cut, passing a sale on to the complementer side and taking a percentage as they do it, gathering a heck of a lot of data in the process, which they make a second revenue stream out of. Yeah. But the aggregator keeps, I say the aggregator keeps the data. That's one of the crucial things of it. And so there's very little technology. The technology is very seldom bespoke. It's common generic technology. It's just the first person again who sees it. There was a very good one in London where somebody came up with the idea. It's I think it's Park Mobile, where they thought we'll go and sign up every church, mosque, sports hall, temple, secular meeting room, their parking spaces during the day when they're not using them. People's front drives, when they take their car out to work, their drive is free. So they went around signing up all these spaces in London, creating an aggregator model, and people can just pay to park for 2 hours in somebody's front drive, or at the church, or at the sports centre when it's not being used. And they've made a considerable amount of money. Second person comes in, they then got to persuade all these property owners to put themselves on their platform. Not going to happen because they've got all the customers. So they've taken this aggregator model and just applied it to a different sector. All you've got to do is find that opportunity in your home countries, and you're onto something. Yeah. So there's an example of the business model canvas circling to what we've done. The key things, for instance, the partners, the riders, should be the restaurants in there. They've got very little resources. A platform and a routing algorithm. That's it. Yeah, it's all web and app based. They've got very little cost, platform cost, and riders' hourly wage, and their revenue stream is a commission on the orders and a transaction fee. It's a very small company in terms of the amount of people that work in it, because the riders are not employed. They're basically contractors. So a very simple model which can be replicated, called an aggregator model, of which, as I say, there are many companies out there pitching the fact that they've come up with a new one. This is part of the industry. I'm going backwards again. Sorry, I don't know what's happening here. Just let me check on. So I want to come to this. What we've covered so far then is red versus blue. If you move into the blue, you can make a considerable impact on business, but you are non-disruptive. You are creating market share. So therefore, it's a contrast between disruption versus non-disruptive creation. You can build business models in both disruptive and non-disruptive ways. I think it's an interesting question of whether disruption could be extended to environmental effects. And as I say, it's not my core area, sustainability, but for your awards, I think it's a valid thing to say disrupt environmental damage. The co-destruction aspect of it using the flourishing business model will be very interesting. I've covered low-end disruption. I often put a question to students whether Tesla is a disruptor, and they use a different model to show it's high-end disruption. They came in at the top, as did a Dyson vacuum cleaners. They came in at the top and came down in disruptive industry. So there are other models. Sustaining innovation and versus disruptive innovation I will come to, and platformization we've touched on. So here's a little example of technological disruption, which I think again applies in the UK context. So I have one of these, believe it or not. When I was a kid, this was early 1970s. Yes, I am that old. My grandma and granddad had this big wooden radio, okay? And it was still working. They used to listen to the Jimmy Young Show when I was a kid. I always remember it. And they bought that in 1940. So they listened to the whole of World War II through that radio. And I still have it. It doesn't work anymore, but I still have it. It's a beautiful thing. But at some point then, when they launched these things, they became disrupted by cinema. Cinema disrupted the radio. It's new technology called film. And then the TV came along, the 1950s, and disrupted the cinema. So when I was, we certainly by the 1990s, 80s, I think it really happened. We'd also had this disruption of home video. Yeah, and then later DVDs. And the Blockbuster chain disrupted the cinemas because you could now hire videos at home rather than going to the cinemas. That in itself And this was disrupted also by satellite television, the first different form of broadcasting which came in. Now, disruption works that way. So what we move into here now is where we start to look at business model disruption. Is to make the next disruption, he had to have, very fast ROMs, hard drives. We had to have an ecosystem of suppliers, such as the phone manufacturers, to get smartphones, smart pads, most recently smart TVs. I think that's only literally 4 or 5 years. We had to have Wi-Fi technology, super fast broadband, and we now have the opportunity to disrupt Netflix. And Netflix initially started as a contrast, posting videos instead of going to visit them. And Blockbuster, believe it or not, had a chance to buy Netflix very early on for about $500,000, which, it's incredible. I think they didn't take it. But then again, it's again doing the model that And then I want to get into this if we have time, and I'll just ask Rob where we are in terms of time, because I can give this example of Disney Plus, how they became a disruptor to Netflix, and how a Paramount Plus and a Discovery Plus came along around 2022 to disrupt the Amazon Primes and the Netflix. So the disruption kept going that way, with different technologies initially disrupting, and then business models coming along. And finally, I think it's reverting almost to the oil industry model, which is an ecosystem 2 strategy, which is owning everything. Okay, and we'll come to that if we have time. Just touch on this, because I mentioned one other thing is that you have to develop not just exploratory business models. It's not just about creating it and then forgetting it. It's not a fire and forget thing. Once you've created the models, a proportion will fail, right? There is a filter effect here, which, again, going back to Clay Christensen's, this is a very good article. You have to have sustaining innovation. So increasingly, you need to focus on the profit formula. And then finally, you need to get efficiency to keep this competitive and keep it going. Return on capital demands become more profound at this stage. So it's not just about fire and forget. You have to sustain the business models once they've been created, and then you need new business models coming in to it's classically a cash cow situation in the BCG logic. Rob, how am I doing for time?
We've got another, let's have a look, because we might use this actually.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a discussion to follow on.
Okay.
So that what we don't probably do today, you and I might be able to incorporate a bit of a presentation at a later date. Maybe. So
what I wanted, sorry,
on time, Fakrul, how are we doing on time?
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've only got a couple of slides to go, but I would like to, if I have time, just to spend a bit of time on using my solution to this problem. Okay.
Excellent.
So
please go on.
If you've done a strategic management module, I'm going to bet that most of you have been taught this classic linear rational process, which goes like this: SWOT, PEST, resource-based view, 5 forces, Ansoff matrix taught wrongly as a retrospective model, BCG, stakeholder, Mendelow's window, skipping complete the idea of how to actually create options, then going to probably to planning as control, budgets, and so on. They sometimes do the a little bit in terms of option creation, but this is where I focus most of my teaching is generating options. So the criticism is that this is not strategy, that it doesn't do all that. It's just an audit. Well, okay, kind of valid, but I'll show you a possible solution to this. You do still need a plan to make it happen. You need certain timescales. You need to plan that this is going to be launched in this date, that we're going to have recruitment of certain people to do this. We're going to have an acquisition of resources and signing contracts, licenses, and so on. That is true. Again, I'm going to present a possible solution to that. It's not much more than a value chain. I still love the value chain. It's a really good tool. It's one of the ones that have survived, but this does more than a value chain. And it doesn't provide a competitive strategy. Yes, if used incorrectly, it doesn't. But again, I'm going to try and address that with this. And this is what I try to get my students to think about when I do consultancy. So this is where we start to get competitive strategy into it, by contrasting you with them. Make sense? We draw up a picture now which looks like a SWOT, right? We need to understand where we are now. We then look at our competitor or competitors to see what they've got. You then also need to look at where nobody is to get the blue ocean. So that kind of fits outside this model, and I'll come to the dynamic capabilities finally. Business model innovation then is where you try to do something which is a move into a blue or disruption of what they are doing. And then firm B will make a response to that, and it's whether you have sustainable advantage here or whether they can just copy everything you've done, in which case it's not really a proper business model disruptive innovation. It's just an incremental move which they will just then copy. So moving to what you can do is scenario play. And I teach business wargaming to my students to say, right, they will move, you will move, they will move, you will move, they will move. So you try to predict what they will do. And if what they will do immediately, makes that move irrelevant, it's not truly business model innovation. It's just sustaining innovation. Okay. It's not moving from this. It's the same business model with some tweaks in it. So for me, that's how you start to move away from it not being about the futures, because this is about the future. It's about competition because you're going to predict not only what they're doing, but what they will do in response to your disruption. And Fakrul, if you can tell me if I run out of time, because I'll try and illustrate this coming back to the Disney example, which is what I've given my students this year as an assignment, which they've gone quite deep into. I'm a complete Marvel fanatic, okay?
Yeah, John, we can continue for 10 more minutes, no problem.
Okay,
then we'll go for Q&A session.
Yeah.
Right, thank you.
I'm a complete Marvel fanatic, so I've been collecting X-Men comics for since I was about 11 years old. So I love doing this case. And I sort of take them through Marvel, bankruptcy to turnaround to acquisition by Disney and so on. So if you look at Disney Pre-Plus, there's no Marvel, there's no Lucasfilms, there's no Fox in the picture. Excuse me. They have basically got Disney World. They've got their children's movies, which are very much key resources. At the same time, Netflix have, and their key partners are cinemas. They changed their channel, so they're classically using a cinema distribution for their movies, and they've got their theme parks. Their channels now are doing the platformisation, and they come along and they disrupt the likes of Sky very significantly because they're moving what was classically the American TV series from Sky onto their platforms. But then you have Disney Plus comes along, and what they do is they take their legacy catalog, massively successful decades of film production, and they copy or replicate the channel, which is a platform here. Now, Netflix, for instance, had a key partner with Disney at this point because they were co-developing shows like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, The Punisher, Defenders, and Luke Cage at the time. And they were doing it with Marvel. And it continued into the early stage of the Disney acquisition. But then they got wind of Disney Plus, and they withdrew from these arrangements because they realized the threat is that the model that they have were largely, their value proposition was a distributor of other people's intellectual property. Okay. So Disney Plus comes along, immediately replicated by Paramount Plus, Discovery Plus. So this model, first mover to Disney Plus, disrupted the disruptor. So Netflix were a disruptor to satellite television broadcasters, cable broadcasters, but they themselves were largely working on a distribution model, whereas they were now moving on a production model. And this is the scary thing. They thought that this massive legacy catalog that they have was the great threat to Amazon, because to Disney and Amazon, because they didn't own that catalog. So we better get it quick. So their response is they moved to production. They've moved from being a distributor to production, and they've Amazon, Netflix, and I think Apple have bought massive studios around the film industry cluster in London. So they've bought, not just hired, but bought studio space down in London. And it's interesting as well that, you know, the disruption that they've had from the way that they've designed, you know, the Marvel, I mean, the latest Marvel stuff, you know, questionable, but up to the Avengers, what's the most successful sequence in a movies ever? What's happened? DC have looked at it as well. Thought, we need to copy that. We've pinched James Gunn. Superman is the first one just coming out this last week that tries to replicate this sequential phasing of movies. So Disney and Marvel have caused considerable disruption in this plus model. And what Disney would like to do, I think, personally, is get rid of cinemas. They would rather have the distribution channel themselves. They've tried that with Black Widow during the COVID pandemic and ended up getting sued by Scarlett Johansson for loss of revenue because it was one of the most poorest performing movies. The cinema still, you know, you're generating 15, 16 pounds a ticket. People go as an experience. So why don't they buy the cinemas? Well, does Disney or any one of the producers have enough material to fill 16 screens every night of the week? They don't. Which is why these cinemas tend to be independent still. And if you bought a cinema chain as Disney, the other manufacturer just wouldn't put stuff into your cinema, I think. That's the model. They would love to control the whole supply chain. It's called an ecosystem 2 strategy, where they're trying to get everything from production to distribution, a bit like the old oil industry model. And I think you can see that effect there using the model I've developed there. And I get my students to try and do this retrospectively, and then you can project it forward to think, okay, what if we do this, what will they do? And will we be disrupted, or will they just match our move if they do it? Okay. So that's a little way of solving some of the criticisms of the business model canvas, I think. I'm going to do 2 more slides. Is that all right, Fakrul? And then we're done. I dropped this in because I think this marks the trajectory of what will happen. Is that you have traditional product-based business models that may move to being platform, the platformisation. They may move now directly to be AI-empowered, platform-based, or they may move from traditional to AI-empowered. Yeah. And this model here could be AI-empowered manufacturing, for instance, in terms of digital manufacturing. So I think there are 4 possible routes to developing now technology-based platform disruptive business models, whether they be blue or red. And I think that's an excellent model. I've not seen one better, which I just throw in there in terms of designing. If you come back to sustainability, you know, how would you use AI to disrupt non-sustainable practices? Both in terms of, I mean, I think, you know, being from an agricultural background, it's interesting how they're using AI now to predict just how much fertilizer can be inserted into farmland without causing runoff. I think that's an interesting example where they're reducing the amount of effluent going into rivers by predicting the exact amount of fertilizer that can be absorbed by plants, the exact amount of pesticide that needs to be put on without causing runoff. So that's, I think, probably within that category. So again, please have a look at the article and consider it. One more slide, and I'll just finish with this because it's a point. And I'll just tell a story. Just before COVID, I was invited to go to the Leverhulme Trust dinner with being one of the grant holders, and a genius of a guy who, if you internationally may not know, but if you listen to Radio 4 on a Thursday evening, the Life Scientific is hosted by a gentleman called Professor Jamal Khalili, who I had the pleasure to meet and listen to in that presentation. And he sparked my interest because he did a presentation on the Terminator moment, and he had a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know, and I'll be back. And there was a big debate. Bear in mind, in this room, we were anthropologists, business people. We weren't AI people. And he was giving a talk about AI for non-specialists. So it resonated with me. And so this was 2019, and he said something now which I always remember, which is machine self-awareness. And he used this example of the Google DeepMind project and AlphaGo versus Lee Sedol, who's the Go game, one of the most technical. If you're from the East Asia, you'll know this. Go game is the most strategic. It makes chess look, one-dimensional. And the world master at that, they played against AI. And Divine Move 42 is, you Google it and find out about it. It's fascinating. Where for a moment they thought machine self-awareness had occurred. And he said at the time that machine self-awareness was 20 or 30 years ago. I believe now they're saying it's imminent. So in 3 to 4 years, it's moved from being sort of 10, 20, 30 years in advance to being, it's imminent, it's happening. And I won't mention who it is, but I have the pleasure to deal with somebody who's a multi-billionaire and has had 80 years experience dealing with the biggest corporate entities in America on new product development. And he's recently been working on, believe it or not, AI at the age of 82. He's working on AI and new product development. And an experiment has happened with a firm, one of the biggest, which I won't name, but one of the biggest that you could think of, where they've recently put the smartest, brightest innovators in a room with a problem, and they've used AI in the other. And AI now is winning. And I kind of feel that's a real concern for the human race. That being said, I still think that those of you who develop this idea of dynamic capabilities have more sustainability in your careers than those who develop skills with routinized capabilities. And I was reading an article just yesterday in the Sunday Times about virtual litigation and how lawyers were likely to be disrupted by virtual litigation by using AI to decide the interpretation of case law. That, demolishes employment in the legal sector. So how do we actually see these blue oceans and so on? Well, I've for a few years had this view that AI can't do that. I'm now not convinced that's the case. So I don't know where we go with this, but I certainly consider that as human beings, if you develop skills that can be replicated by AI, prepare to be replaced by AI in your lifetime. So sensing, seizing, and transforming, I still think is the kind of where the human strikes back a little bit. Anticipating, challenging, wisdom, I think is still largely the domain of the human mind to challenge and to say, we're not doing it that way. Interpretation, I think humans can still make interpretations of things that perhaps AI can't do. And then finally is the leading of transformation. So, AI can come up with a model, but humans, I think, have to implement it. So as a loop, I would recommend, and a final point, anything by Paul Schumacher is worth reading. And David Teese, again, I had the pleasure to meet him in 2014. One of the most cited papers in business history on dynamic capabilities is where we bring back humans and AI. And I've got a PhD starting this year who's looking at interaction between dynamic capabilities and AI, which I think will be fascinating. And it's something I want to get into, to look at the survival of the human being, the sustainability of the human being in the ecosystem in the face of AI. Rob, I shall finish there if that's okay.
Fantastic. That really is good. And a man of my own heart, strategy is something that I get involved in academically like you, and it's interesting to see the different viewpoints, and definitely be having a look at some of those references you put forward. I'll just give you some sort of observations for the audience, of really sharing what you're saying and sort of substantiating it. We all get influenced. You'll hopefully get influenced by this blue ocean thinking and strategizing using different models. Many years ago, I did an MBA in finance at Nottingham University, and I was influenced in the same way you're influenced by John, by a professor called Ken Starkey, and he had a book by Starkey and Dobson, and pretty much like what John is saying. Create your own models using situation analysis. You have all these different models and frameworks, and he said, go on a journey to create your own model. So or you've been introduced to these different frameworks and these different models. I'm a big fan. I'm a Six Sigma lean practitioner. So when I saw value added and non-value added, I tend to look at problems and create a value proposition statement. What is the voice of the customer, and where is the added value, and where's the non-value added, and let's get the value added out of the process. That's the waste. So there are so many frameworks, so many models, but it's how you actually use the tools in the box. And then finally, contextualized to sustainability. I got involved when you mentioned concrete in Ukraine. In 1987, I was looking at making an acquisition of a recycled concrete operation on a railhead, and they were using recycled materials into the ready-mix concrete. The issue that we had is we were a large ready-mix concrete producer, and concrete is specified, and it goes structural concrete has real issues. We have alkali silica reaction many years later, concrete cancer, because the spec wasn't right. So when you're creating products like concrete, you have to look at the specifications, you have to look at its application. And what we decided is that we'd use recycled concrete, but we'd use it in non-structural. So we'd use it in footings where there was non-structural concrete. So concrete is a fascinating thing. I've been involved in it for many years. I bought a cement plant in China with a specific use. We use tire-derived fuel, TDF, shredded tires going in because of the high energy consumption of cement manufacturer. One of the ways to reduce their energy inputs is to use TDF. So if you look at, there is a quest to get zero carbon concrete. It's been there for many years. And then we go back to waste. If we look at waste, we have to look in sustainability. A lot of it is driven by policy. It's driven by regulation. And so to disrupt that market requires sometimes the non-corporates to get involved. So we would be acquiring companies that set up their own material recycling facilities using demolition waste to produce products. We would see how they would develop, and then we would acquire them because we wouldn't take the risk. So the disruption was tended to be done by entrepreneurs, not the main corporates. And then the corporates would watch them develop and then make strategic acquisitions. So it is fascinating in sustainability. If you look at waste to energy and renewable energy, a lot of these technologies, a lot of green technology, they're developed by green entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, not necessarily innovation from the corporates, but outside of the corporates. And then the corporates bring them in or buy them out or create spin-offs. We created a spin-off in Hanson, which was with special projects. We were mavericks. We were sitting in Dartford looking at acquiring different companies that would make, we did the Eden project. They wanted to use peat and rape the peat bogs of Ireland. And we used a soil scientist, an agronomist called George Longmuir, Mr. Compost UK. He'd been working in agriculture for ICI in America, brought him back in. We bought a company called a compost company in Dirtnell Builders Merchants that acquired on a civic amenity site in Kent. And we started creating green waste and producing compost out of green waste, putting it through windrows, composting it, putting it over peat screens. And we had all the contracts with Country Vale Gardens, bagged compost. And we suddenly realized we could put this product up the value chain. So we manufactured from a base material of a green waste compost, and we added soily loam from quarries on the overburden, and then added different materials such as lignitic clay, bark, and we produced 8 different mixes. And we went to Tim Schmidt in Eden Project, who developed from a Heligan garden that he'd acquired to the largest botanic garden in the world, and said, why using peat? We'll manufacture soil. Never been done before. So we are disrupting it because we then become the specifier. It's very difficult when you've got an organization that specifies the product and you can't get product approval. but it's very easy when they haven't got that product approved and you then become the specifier. So there's some real practical aspects of this that I really think that these models that John has created are able to contextualize to sustainability in a meaningful way, whether that be waste minimization, waste recycling, waste to energy, renewable energy, the creating reusable recycled products, reducing packaging, reducing the levels of plastic, developing new products, looking at green finance, looking at the ways of crowdfunding, for example, peer-to-peer lending, social lending. That wasn't done by the banks. That was done by web designers and financiers outside the main banks, outside the retail banks. And all of a sudden they became a threat to the banks, and the banks made acquisitions of these crowdfunding platforms. So sustainability really does create innovators, and it creates entrepreneurs. And these models that you've seen, and taking license to create your own business canvases, taking license to develop your own models to suit the purpose of the genre of sustainability that you're looking at, is a real opportunity. And before you go, one little story. Echo shoe manufacturer wanted to look at with their staff, what will a retail shop look like in 10 years? How did they do that? They had to take all the boundaries, all the regulation away from them. They were thinking like this, they had tunnel vision, and he introduced what we call the Kenvic model and created novel thinking. And so the decision making that you will require in your casework to come up with novel ideas is really exciting, because you have to take those boundaries away. And what John has introduced you to is this ability to capture these ideas through the models, get the original decision making locked in, looking at what the drivers are, looking at what the influences are, and looking where you can create this solution to the case studies that you're looking at. Excellent. Really enjoyed it, and I've learned a lot today. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Rob. Just as an aside, I think there's a hand up if we have time. Keep focused on the idea of a design lens. This is about designing futures, and this is where I very much like this technique. So designing a future which is greener is your focus on this one. So it's understanding where you are now, what the environmental costs and benefits are of your current operation, what the environmental benefits and costs are of your competitive offerings. And I like that, I haven't really gone into it, but the flourishing business models going into now this idea of value co-destruction and value co-creation. So how you're looking at actually, eliminating the value co-destruction that is currently having.
So John,
value co-creation.
John, to simplify this for our audience, one of the things that I would recommend that they do is map the current state. What is the current state of the situation you're looking at? And what does the future state look like? And the future state is something that will develop through creating this value. And I call it using the green balance scorecard. I think we did that on a canvas to see what were the impacts, what were the benefits, environmentally, economically, socially, what are the impacts and what are the benefits, and capturing it and putting it on a scorecard holistically. But that's the future state. The current state at the moment, you have to map it before you start even making suggestions of how you could improve it and what the solutions are, and to develop a new product or a new service. But it's looking at the current state.
Do we have time?
The tools are there.
There's a couple of hands up. Do we have time, Rob?
Yeah, of course we have.
Yeah, we have also some questions.
Alex Mukama, you've got your hand up, Alex. I'll move on. Ekrenabo. Oh, Alex,
okay.
We've got you.
Okay, members, I would like to know, how is the trend of technology affecting the competitiveness of the model? Because if the trend of technology is not considered, some of the models of competitiveness in the business are always affected. So how is that trend managed in the trend of technology change? Currently, we have AI, people are changing technology into cloud space. How is that one being addressed in the mode of competitiveness? Thank you.
Shall I take that, Rob?
Yeah, sure.
Well, firstly, what I've just done doesn't necessarily rest purely on technological disruption, right? The value innovation can occur without technological disruption. As far as business models go, if you are looking to the future, and I would recommend, no one knows for certain what will be the disruptive technology until it's disrupted. But there are some very interesting projections. One is the Gartner hype cycle, which would be worth looking at regularly because it predicts breakthrough technologies. And it goes through this cycle. If you Google it now, it's called the Gartner, Gartner, the Gartner hype cycle, and it'll go straight to it. And if you want to think about the technologies that are coming through, most of which I've never heard of and what they do, there is a kind of a predictor of the new technologies. And you see that the failure rate of those is quite high. So they get excited about these technologies, and venture capitalists pile in. And the biggest one about 4 years ago was the Segway. Everybody was going to have a Segway, and all the investor money went into it, and it failed miserably. So there are no certainties of knowing which technology is going to be disruptive. But you can build a business model around a piece of disruptive technology. You can also try to predict, as the potentially disrupted party, what new technologies might impact on your business. And part of this is the peripheral vision, which we look, and weak signal analysis, which is looking for those things that we might be ignoring beyond our normal focus. So as an innovator, you need to look outside the normal. What you would normally do in a kind of the boundaries of a SWOT is looking at the weak signals, looking at the emerging signals, and then playing them out to think what the effect is, what we could use them to disrupt, or how they could be used to disrupt us. So it's not just about technological disruption. Non-disruptive creation is a blue ocean, and you can have disruptive business model innovation that involves no technology whatsoever. So that, well, no technological innovation whatsoever, and uses existing technologies in a recombinant way. So I'm hoping that's sort of partially answered your question. Yeah.
Can I just add on to that as well? That
Yeah.
As you've said, John, from the point of view as being entrepreneurs and getting involved in these sort of case studies, I've often seen, and I found it as when I was a sort of GM for Hanson Recycling, and we were looking at developing new products and looking at what these different entrepreneurs were doing. We came across a guy who was producing manhole covers from recycled materials and plastic curbs. And what you find is that there's going to be some sunk funds. There's going to be some research and development. And as John has alluded to, private equity investors will obviously, they may look at unicorns, high risk, high returns. But I think from your perspectives, you should be looking at quick wins. There's a lot of existing technology that can be used in a different way. And I'll give you an example of that. I visited a friend of mine on the Clean Peninsula in Wales, and he owns a big hotel. And we were talking, and he said, "Come around the back. I'm running my diesel car on cooking oil." And he'd been collecting all the cooking oil as a bit of an experiment in a town called Pwllheli from the different restaurants. And then he had a little bit of a chemistry kit round the back, and he was producing a blended diesel from cooking oil. And he said, "It's reduced my fuel costs considerably." And I said, "Well, how much is this kit?" He says, "Well, it's about £4,000 from eBay." And then I start talking to a friend in Ghana, and I said, "Well, why don't we run all the taxis in Ghana, in this little village, in this town?" And I've got a friend out there, and we sent the kit out, and now they're sort of using an existing technology, but they're scaling it up. So a quick win has low cost, zero cost. It can happen now, and is it reversible? So if it doesn't work, we can stop it. And then there's these long-term things that require a lot of sunk funds, a lot of R&D, and this may be out of our reach as sort of young sustainable practitioners. And then the last one got a little scheme at Tutbury where 50 houses are trying to generate their own electricity, and they've got a river nearby, and they've basically put set up a little hydroelectric scheme, put a little an Archimedes screw into the river, and now they're generating their own electricity, and they've done it through their own social enterprise. They've raised their own funds. It's taken a lot of time. They've had to get through planning permission. So don't think it's the big deal, and it requires a huge amount of sunk funds and a huge amount of time. There are ways that we can take existing technology and use it on smaller scale. And I think this is where we're going with sustainability, transitional towns in as much that we can create be sustainable as a community on utilities and the way that we run our cars, the way that we travel, the way we use bikes, the way we use intermodal transport, the way that we run our houses. There are a lot of things that we can do in communities, growing our own food, being self-sufficient through allotments. And so sometimes it's not necessarily the big ideas and the big technology that we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at ways that we can just improve the way we live. Other questions?
There was a couple of hands up and I seem to have gone down. Is any questions outstanding?
Yeah, there are some questions as well here. How can traditional organizations begin transitioning toward a blue ocean strategy without alienating their existing customer base?
Well, you see, that's almost a paradoxical question, because the blue ocean, you don't have an existing customer base. The idea is that you're moving in. One of the models in the blue ocean toolbox is it's called, they talk about tier 1 customers, tier 2 non-resisting non-customers, those on the hedge. So what you would be doing is looking at a completely different customer group. So if it is a blue ocean, then by default, you're looking at a different customer set. Now, there is a debate in the second. One of the things that was controversial from the first book to the second book was this idea of, all blue oceans being non-disrupted. So they had to kind of walk that back a little bit. So they've now got a scale between disruptive blue and non-disruptive blue. But essentially, if you're looking at a blue ocean move, you're trying to move into a non-competitive space. Therefore, a different customer definition. It may be that the existing customers also buy in that sector. And it may be that if it's a disruptive situation, that they migrate into that. So one of the criticisms about it was it's, cannibalistic, in the sense that you create a blue ocean which just moves customers from one sector to another. There are many cases in the book that say that doesn't happen. And there are many, cases where they create, a space where there are no customers. It's almost like the desert island kind of mentality, or the first person washed up on the beach. Yeah. And then your subsequent customers are washed up with you, become, the customers to your model. So I think there's a slight paradoxical element to that question, is if it's a blue ocean, you're probably not going to upset existing customers because you're moving away from them.
Right. Thank you. John, do you have enough time? I mean, like
yeah,
5
please, I'm
minutes.
fine. Yeah.
There are some more questions we have. So what skill sets or mindsets are most critical for professional aiming to lead or support innovation initiatives within their organizations?
Well, I can go back to that last slide of dynamic capabilities.
Right.
Which is why I just dropped that at the end. I mean, I have to say that's a 2-hour lecture I give on that model. So that was just a literary cursory introduction. So how, for instance, the question I was literally talking about this week with a new PhD that's coming in and working towards a possible grant application was, what dynamic capabilities? I mean, I'm totally grumpy about AI. It terrifies me. So I'm not having, I've got to say self-critically, I don't have the dynamic capabilities to really probably make an advantage. I'm 56 now, closer to the end of the beginning. So do I have time to absorb this? So, well, that's where younger people are coming in. And I've teamed up with one of my colleagues who does know this stuff to do this PhD, to ask the question about what dynamic capabilities are needed and how you develop them in both individually as an organization to best use AI. So you've got this agency structure interaction where you have that physical thing that's there, but the agency of the human choosing it to use it or not use it, or use it in a specific way. And I think the explanation of that lies in the idea of dynamic capabilities, the openness to change. And, you know, perhaps I'm too grumpy for it now. You know, my experience a bit too many students using it unfairly in assignments, and our colleagues are doing great things with it now in terms of, you know, designing assessments and so on, and the use of AI in doing it. So I'm probably a bit behind the curve in terms of use of AI, but I think the answer to how you get people to embrace it lies in explanations probably couched in dynamic capability terms. So I will certainly start with that article, and there is a great deal of work, because I looked for it just recently with my new PhD, published in the last year on dynamic capabilities and human-machine interaction. I think is the really fascinating thing to look at, how you get humans using machines to their best effect.
Yeah, there is another connected questions, I guess. What are the connection between PMs and corporate culture and mindset?
Oh, that's fascinating. That is actually one of the biggest critiques. I was looking for a book, and it's on my shelf somewhere, but I can't just put my hand on it. And quite recently, the book, it's not Ferganini, it's Fergano. The author's called Fergano, and it came out, and they were saying exactly the same thing, that the thing that's missing from the business model canvas, and he proposed another model which I'll be bringing into my teaching next year, is exact thing. What are the values that we carry in our business model is missing from that canvas, and you know, what are the mission of this business model is missing from both those canvases I've introduced to you. And I thought that was a brilliant. It's really bugging me because I know it's on this shelf somewhere, but
it's all right. What we'll do was, you remember, you can just forward me the text. I will share in our LinkedIn
it's Fergano.
profile.
Alex Fergano, I think, is the author. I've only partially read it. I think it's downstairs, actually. I think I'm still sort of flick reading it when I get a moment. It's on my coffee table downstairs. And there's a very interesting model there that incorporates missions, vision, and value into the business model canvas. So I think that's a very fair point, is that what I've shown you today doesn't really cover that. But there are other people who've advanced the critique of business model canvases who've spotted the same thing, which I intend to bring to my teaching next year. So it's a very, very good question.
Thank you. Another question: how can we internally incubate disruptive ideas while protecting them from corporate inertia?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer. I mean, corporate inertia is the opposite of innovation. It's becoming, you know, in the UK, we're talking about the Marks and Spencer's model that's been disrupted by the Zaras of this world. So I think it's a slightly awkward question to answer, because I'm suggesting that particularly younger people can see different ways of doing things which create disruptive business models, which challenge the corporate inertia that tends to lead to failure of tried and tested, not necessarily models, but ways of doing business. So that the new people on the block come in and disrupt that. So corporate inertia is, I mean, the example I've given you there is the flag carriers versus EasyJet and Ryanair. They just had this way of doing which led to overshoot, and somebody else saw the opportunity for low-end disruption. They tried to react, and they couldn't copy the business model of these low-frills operators. They just couldn't do it. They set up an airline to do it, but they just couldn't get it right. They were so wedded to this, you know, overshoot model, which is keep adding value, charging more. So that's a bit of a flailing answer, because it's not a straightforward question, that one. The corporate inertia occurs, and that leads to the opportunity for disruptive business models to come in and change the rules of the game. So I'm not particularly happy with that answer, but I think it sort of gets halfway there.
All right, thank you, John. This is the last question I'm just taking. What will be the best strategy for developing countries? If you have any suggestion, please.
Well, that's interesting, because one of the things I get, I teach a lot of students from China, for instance, and I think, you know, I have a very strong co-author in China, and I think this assumption that they should always do it the way that the Western businesses have done it is deeply flawed. They've managed to come up with different ways of internationalization, which are highly original. And I think if you're in a developed economy, just don't look to what are so-called developed economies for inspiration. Look at other developing economies, perhaps slightly ahead of you in the curve, to see how they've done things with less resources and more agility. Because a lot of Chinese companies now running rings around Western ones, as they are in India. You can look at templates, for instance, of successful businesses and apply them where they haven't been used in developing economies. But at the same time, Blue Ocean strategy is doing what nobody has done before, where nobody has been before. So it's not a question of looking for inspiration from other developing economies or developed economies. It's doing something that none of them have done. So don't be constrained by, by what has been done previously, but also what has not been done anywhere. So I hope that kind of partially answers your question.
Thank you very much, John. Excellent session. I think everyone has enjoyed this session.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
that was fantastic. Thank you, John.
Yeah,
it's pleasure.
On behalf of Edupro and everyone, thank you very much, Rob.
Well, my intention was basically to introduce you to some ideas for further reading.
Excellent.
So I think I'll just reiterate that even in lectures, which I still consider it a cursory overview, I will do that same material in about 10 hours. And then probably 5 tutorials, so probably in total about 15 hours to deliver the same message. So it was kind of a very brief overview. So for instance, dynamic capabilities I'll do in a 2-hour lecture. Blue Oceans is a 2-hour lecture.
Yeah,
business models is a 2-hour lecture. So it is very much a kind of here's some ideas to take away and look at it. Very practical for some of you who actually go out and do something with it. It's not just theoretical. It moves beyond the academic. So I hope some of you can take away and be inspired enough to read into it further and perhaps then use it in the projects you're doing within this program.
Definitely, fantastic.
Thank
you, John. And no doubt we'll try and keep in touch.
Yeah,
please do.
Yeah.
We need to talk about rugby in Nottingham as well at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Take care. Thanks for organising this, Fakhrul, and thanks for everybody. Thank you, John.
Thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate that. Thank you very much indeed.
Bye.
Bye now.
Thank you, everyone. Participants, could you please share your email address so that we can issue the e-certificate? It will be helpful for us.